This is Dr. Thomas Klein. I'm a specialist in chronic and rare diseases. We are part of a team called JAT Educational. Our goal as a team of physicians, nurse practitioners, people with chronic diseases, editors, writers, researchers, is to come up with facts. So I am presenting facts. We do not publish opinions. Sadly, the unauthorized CDC guideline is basically an opinion paper. They themselves said that the scientific evidence was very low. There's no such category even lower. So if there's no scientific evidence, that would fall into the category. And then they said they used expert review and contextual evidence review. Those mean opinions. Now the CDC guideline is 50 pages, single-spaced, very difficult to read. And here is our standard textbook in pharmacology we doctors use called Goodman and Gilman. Goodman and Gilman is what we use as the primary source for all information concerning medications. And this is the section here on opiates. It's 20 pages. It mentions overdose a couple times. It mentions a tapering once. The CDC guideline mentions overdose deaths 142 times. Sounds to me like there may be some bias involved. They said they did not recommend tapering, but it appears the word tapering appears 46 times. So this brings us to this important issue of dependency versus addiction. The point is something we're going to discuss in a minute, and this is something that's discussed in logic. This is post hoc, ergo propter hoc, which is kind of nicknamed as post hoc. And what it means is after this, therefore, because of this. It's easier to think of an example. Every time that rooster crows, the sun comes up. Therefore, the rooster makes the sun rise. Here's a more appropriate ergo hoc fallacy. Fallacy, by the way, is a word we use in logic. It means you are not going to get any points trying to argue using fallacies. Here's the one that's given by the people who wrote this article. Nearly all heroin addicts use marijuana before they tried heroin. Therefore, marijuana leads to the use of heroin. So it's very important because there's been an awful lot of errors about the rooster crows. And here is the big one. Dependency is normally thought of by most people as having a withdrawal reaction when you stop taking it. And that happens. And it happens to everyone who takes an opiate painkiller. It also happens to everyone who takes an antipsychotic drug, an antidepressant drug. The worst withdrawals with antidepressant drugs, sleep medication, tranquilizers, muscle relaxants, even Zyrtec, across-the-counter antihistamine. There are tons and tons of medications that you have withdrawal from. So instead of using the word dependence, we're going to use the word biochemical interdependence. We're going to start trying to use that little longer word, because if we're talking about setting up an addiction clinic for people who are dependent on opiates, we're not going to be able to get rid of that word dependency. But we're certainly going to be able to get rid of it by switching it to biochemical interdependence whenever we're talking about a withdrawal. Okay, so here's how it works. People with heroin addiction have biochemical interdependence. Therefore, anybody who has biochemical interdependence and withdrawals is addicted. That's how this got to be what it is. And very strongly, this is involved with the CDC guidelines and prop. We have two groups that are making the assumption that long-term use of opiate medication doesn't work, and all of them are becoming addicted. So there's 96 million people a year that take opiates in the United States, and so we would think like half of them, maybe 45 million, are addicted. No, it's 800,000 according to the statistics from the government. And what this means is opiate addiction is not increasing in spite of many people making flat statements. What's a flat statement? It's when you read in these articles that this happens and then there's no reference. People are just making this up. They aren't citing their own research, they're not citing statistics, they're just making flat statements. So you have to be careful when you read these flat statements, and the media is great at picking up on these. They never look into it, they never try to verify things, you just make flat statements. There's been more addiction. That's not true. There's been more overdoses. That's true. But the overdoses have been increasing by the same percentage every year since 1970. Why is that? It has to do with the numbers, and we're going to talk about that. It has to do with presentation of numbers, and we talked a little bit about the tricky numbers of percentage of percentage. So anyway, the entire CDC did not write the guidelines. It was written by this division. This division took it upon itself to categorize heroin overdoses as injuries. And that's based on the fact that they're poisonings. So they're kind of reaching into places they don't deserve to reach into, plus they do not have a congressional mandate to do this at all, and that's why we call these unauthorized. These are unauthorized guidelines. Now, the second group, the Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, or PROP, whose president is Jane Ballantyne, whose executive director is Andrew Kolodny. These people went over to the CDC and they wrote the CDC guidelines according to many papers that we have reviewed. We're also suspicious because the same references here, when they went to the FDA and were turned down, ended up here at the CDC. Okay, so this is pretty radical. They're saying that pain medicines no longer are the drug of choice. We need to use alternatives. And the question is, how many other medical organizations supported PROP and the CDC? Next time we're going to talk about what they recommended people do instead of taking 5,000 years worth of pain medicine that has worked and been free of serious side effects. Thank you.